Working at the marina offered Chad as much time out of doors as it did inside the store. He walked up and down the docks, making his rounds, checking for broken drainage pipes, frayed power lines, and boats that appeared to be taking on water. He gave tours to potential tenants and offered friendly reminders to tenants who were neglecting bills. There were half a dozen children who lived at the marina year-round, and Chad was told that there would be even more of them during the summer. Chad had to make sure they were wearing life jackets whenever they were outside, and then follow up with parents if other tenants complained about kids running up and down the docks without life jackets on. Jack came to the office to let Chad know about some of these things, but mostly he found out when tenants stopped by the fuel dock in a huff. Every once in a while, Chad would find Jack sitting on a bench in the shade, wiping his forehead and breathing heavily. He said he had emphysema, which forced him to take long breaks when walking even short distances. You wouldn't know it to hear him talk. When he spoke, he might go on for hours if you were willing to listen. Whatever stamina his body lacked, his mind, or at least his mouth, seemed to make up the difference. On most days, Chad's interaction with Rick, the marina owner, amounted to a good morning and a see you tomorrow. When Rick was in the office, he was often on the phone arguing with customers and employees about invoices for the boat repair shop he owned several hundred yards downstream. Otherwise, he was up on land, visiting with investors and the owners of his bigger accounts. Tricia, a whimsical middle-aged Rock Creek employee, held the boat hauling and boatyard end of the business together with her calm presence. She was the one who had seen Chad's resume and pushed to get him hired. A couple of days after Chad arrived, she moved her workspace from the desk between Rick and Chad in the marina office to an office downstream at the boatyard. It soon became clear to Chad that Tricia was moving her work to get some distance between herself and Rick, who questioned her every move. The boat repair and boat delivery ends of the business were where he stood to gain or lose the most money. To get a hold of Tricia, Chad had to call her on one of the 3 landlines in the office. When he called about Jack, the harbor master, she said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you about him. Yes, he's got an honorary position that exists mostly in his head. And you can tell him I said so, too, if you see him before I do. You can also tell him I said he has to be nice to you or I will sneak a bunch of kidney beans into Skookum's dog food." Tricia's voice always sounded as if she were rushing to get her sentences out before the words were overcome by her pervasive laughter. "You're enjoying this from up there on land, away from everyone's beer breath, aren't you?" "Oh, absolutely. I'm sorry I abandoned you, but I'm trying to salvage a $100,000 repair job this week, and it wasn't going to happen with Rick yelling at the customers I'm on the phone with. Don't worry about old Jack. His bark is way worse than his bite. He actually loves poetry and literature, even though he can't focus on small print anymore with his bad eyesight. He has quite a few stories of his own up his sleeve. Just don't back down, and don't try to pet Skookum either. Give that a few months first." Chad was just about to ask whether it was Jack or the dog he should worry about most, but Tricia had already moved on to list some of the responsibilities that Jack and a few other tenants had in exchange for moorage, beer, or both. "Most of this is pretty unofficial. Jack lives at the marina in exchange for looking over things before and after Rick is gone for the day. Sometimes Jack makes you write down what he owes you, but he never pays. Just don't give away any cash from the till, apart from making change, and the money should balance out at the end of the week. I'll worry about that." Chad began to understand the unofficial layer of business going on at Rock Creek Marina. There were no files for Jack in any of the employee records, just an understanding that came from knowledge of the place and its history, knowledge Chad could only develop over time. There were no reports or files for stories he would need to learn to be a person in the place that was Rock Creek Marina, rather than an employee operating in a position there. There's a transition you make moving from a fixed point on land to a world afloat. You can't stand with one foot on a dock and another on a boat for long without committing one way or another, unless you want to fall into the drink. In the past, on the river with Abby, the life of constant shifting had been a way to live more consciously in his own body, to live a more physically active, careful existence with a million purposeful actions. Maintaining balance gave Chad a sense of peace, unlike his quietest, stillest moments on land. Ever since he'd crashed the boat and had to move off the water, he couldn't shake the feeling of being adrift. The more time he spent on the dock during work hours, the better he felt. He was beginning to see how the weather brought changes to the water and to the shoreline. There was always more to see and hear and smell on the water. Seals chasing salmon upstream, the ripple of a snake moving across the surface of the water, the fresh scent of new rain falling on a dry shoreline. In the eyes of those who lived on the river, Chad's official position at the marina was indeterminate at best, compared to the positions of authority that Jack and some of the others held. Jack was rooted to the place. The river flowed in his bones. He was in his early 80s and had lived on the river all his life. Not just any river either. He had lived most of his life on this channel that flowed out of the Willamette and into the Columbia, the waterways that surrounded and created Sauvie Island, the largest island in the state of Oregon. Jack's parents had settled on the island before the First World War, and Jack had lived there, or on the Oregon side of the channel, since he was born. He told of rowing across the channel to school in the late 30s and early 40s, back when it used to get really cold. The river froze over once, he said. It was that cold. His family's was the first farm on the island to have electricity. They used to get called to the Oregon side of the Multnomah Channel to help roll dead bears or elk off the railroad tracks on the hill above the marina in the years before the state highway. Jack had seen marinas come and go, watched them erode, watched tensions build between power boaters and sailboaters. His loyalties were with the river and those who respected it, not with those who saw it as a commodity to exploit.